8:12 in the morning. That's when my sister texted me one line that ended 15 years of family peace. "I'm quitting my job. You'll take care of us while I figure things out." No greeting, no guilt, just expectation. I wiped my hands, stared at the message, and typed 4 words I'd never said before. "That's not on me." Then I opened my laptop and signed the overseas contract waiting in my inbox. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again. Mom. But what she wrote next didn't just test my patience. It forced me to choose between blood and freedom. Before we dive in, hit like and tell me, have you ever been the responsible one who finally said no? Have you ever paid the price for someone else's choices until there was nothing left of yourself? Drop a comment. You're not alone. Let's get into this. Part 1. The Burden. 782 words. When people say family keeps you grounded, they don't mention how heavy the ground can feel when you're the one holding everyone up. I've always been that person. Emma Pierce, 32, operations manager. The human equivalent of a spreadsheet. My parents called me the stable one. What they meant was the one who never says no. Our family dinners looked warm from the outside. A roast in the oven, football humming from the living room, candles flickering against framed photos of vacations we couldn't afford without my credit card. But beneath the calm, everything was measured. My time, my paycheck, my patience. Mom would pass the bread and say, "You know, your sister's creative spirit just needs support right now." Translation: Jenna's latest failed dream had a new invoice attached. Dad would grunt from behind his beer. "Emma grabbed the check, will you?" As if it were tradition carved in stone. And Jenna, hair perfectly undone, voice syrup sweet, would smile like she'd earned another subsidy. I'd sit there pretending the math didn't sting. The rent I quietly covered, the insurance I paid, the vet bills for her dog I never met. My phone was full of reminders labeled family bills, a list that used to make me proud. It meant I was useful, dependable, the glue. But lately, that glue felt more like handcuffs. Let me show you what that glue cost. 3 years ago, Jenna needed an apartment deposit. $2,000. "Just until I get my first paycheck," she promised. I never saw it again. 2 years ago, she maxed out a credit card on a photography course that would change everything. I cleared the debt, $6,400. Last year, her car broke down the same week she quit her barista job. "I can't work retail anymore, Emma. It's killing my soul." I covered the repairs. $1,800. Add the monthly phone plan, the car insurance I kept in my name, the utilities at my parents' house that somehow became my responsibility. $87,000. That's what peace cost me over the years. Mom liked to say family evens out in the end. She never saw that even meant I bled a little, more every time someone else made a mess. I told myself it was temporary, that Jenna would finally get her act together. But she never did, and somehow I was always the safety net. Even Mike, my boyfriend, patient and kind, had started to notice. "You know they don't love you because you fix everything, right?" he'd said once. "They love you because it's convenient." I'd laughed it off, but his words stuck, quiet and sharp. The last Sunday dinner I went to, I remember Jenna breezing in 20 minutes late, wearing an outfit that cost more than my week's groceries. Mom hugged her like she'd returned from war. "You've had such a hard week," she cooed. I poured the wine, pretending not to hear. Later, when Mom leaned close and said, "You're lucky, Emma. You don't need anyone to take care of you." I smiled the way people do when they're swallowing fire. That night, I opened my notes app and scrolled through the debts again. Each entry a little confession I'd never made out loud. Phone plan, utilities, car insurance, apartment deposit, credit card balance, vet emergency, car repair, photography course tuition. The list went on. It wasn't just money. It was proof of how far I'd go to keep the peace. I didn't know it then, but peace was exactly what I was about to lose. And somehow, finally, gain. Part 2. The Breaking Point. 798 words. It started small, like all cracks do. A late payment here. "Can you just spot me till next month there?" But by that fall, Every favor had turned into a standing order. My family didn't even ask anymore. They expected. Then came the morning Jenna announced she'd quit her job. She made it sound poetic, like a declaration of self-love. It was toxic, she said at dinner, stabbing her mashed potatoes like a martyr. I'm focusing on my mental health. Mom clasped her hands, eyes shining. That's so brave, sweetheart. I stared at my plate. When I'd taken a single sick day last year, Mom said I was being dramatic. Jenna's boyfriend, Caleb, grinned across the table. She's building a brand, something creative. Dad nodded, proud. Faith. That's what matters. I wanted to ask if Faith could pay rent, but I bit my tongue. After dinner, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. Honey, Jenna's going through a hard time, she whispered like it was breaking news. She just needs a little runway, you understand? I did understand. That runway was paved with my paychecks. That night, back in my apartment, I sat in the dark with only the hum of the fridge for company. My notes app was open. Payments, bills, insurance, deposits. I scrolled through the numbers until they blurred. It wasn't a ledger anymore. It was a map of my own exhaustion. 2 weeks of silence followed. No texts, no calls, just the weight of waiting. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know it would arrive at 8:12 in the morning. The morning light was soft, harmless. My phone buzzed on the counter. I'm quitting my job. You'll take care of us. While I figure things out. No greeting, no guilt, just assumption. I stared at it for a long time, toothbrush still in my mouth. For years, my instinct had been to fix, to send money, to smooth over the chaos. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was Mike's voice echoing in my head. You've been paying for permission to be loved. I wiped my hands, opened the message, and typed 4 words. That's not on me. My fingers trembled as I hit send. It felt like pushing a button that could blow up the only bridge I'd ever known. Silence. No reply. Just the faint hum of the bathroom fan and my own heartbeat. I walked into the living room, still half stunned. On my laptop screen was the Dublin contract I'd been too afraid to sign. I hovered over it. For months, I'd made excuses. Mom would panic. Jenna would crumble. Dad would guilt-trip me. But not this time. The moment I pressed sign, a tiny notification blinked. Document completed. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. But I felt something unclenched deep inside me. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up again. Mom. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at her name glowing against the screen, and I swear the air shifted. Whatever came next, I already knew it wouldn't be love. It would be the price tag for saying no. Mom's text came exactly 10 minutes later, like clockwork. If you won't help your sister, don't come to Thanksgiving. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. For years, those words would have crushed me. Not because I cared about the turkey or the small talk, but because exclusion meant guilt. And guilt was how they kept me in orbit. But this time, I laughed. Softly, almost in disbelief. That's supposed to scare me? I whispered to no one. But it feels like freedom. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at the contract confirmation still glowing from earlier. Dublin. Housing included. Start date Monday. It felt like a life I'd only daydreamed about, now quietly waiting for me to choose it. For the first time, I realized my family didn't just drain my bank account, they drained my ability to imagine life without them. That was about to change. Part 3. The War. 892 words. I opened another tab. My online banking. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but focus. One by one, I scrolled through the recurring payments I'd carried for years. The family phone plan, Jenna's car insurance, utilities tied to my parents' house, cancel, remove, deactivate. Each click was small but seismic. I half expected lightning to strike or Mom to burst through the door. Instead, there was only silence. Clean, almost peaceful. My phone buzzed again, a voicemail from Aunt Rose. Sweetheart, family gives and receives. Maybe you can give a little more this season. God will bless you back tenfold. Delete. Mike called later that night. His voice was warm, steady. You did it, didn't you? I think so, I said. I finally said no. You didn't say no, he corrected gently. You said yes to yourself. That line stuck. After we hung up, I started a new document labeled Exit Plan. I typed it in bold. Underneath, I listed every step like instructions for survival. Remove my name from their phone plan. Unlink Jenna's car insurance. Cancel utilities at the parents' house. Freeze shared credit lines. Transfer savings to a new account. Each line tightened a knot I hadn't realized was still loose. When I finished, I sat back and exhaled. For the first time in years, my life didn't look like a to-do list written for someone else. Still, the old habits tugged at me. I kept checking my phone, expecting Mom to call, expecting an apology that never came. By midnight, 23 unread messages blinked on my screen. None of them said, "I'm proud of you." Most said some version of, "You'll regret this." Maybe I would, but regret, at least, would finally belong to me. Mom didn't wait long to escalate. By the next morning, my phone was a war zone. Group texts, missed calls, guilt dripping from every message. Mom, family meeting tonight. Dad, we expect you here at 7. Jenna, don't make this harder than it already is. It was astonishing how fast they could turn "please help" into "how dare you." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing the simplest answer of my life. I won't be there. Almost instantly, the typing bubbles appeared. Mom, you will. Jenna, you're unbelievable. Dad, watch your tone. I silenced the chat and turned my phone face down. The quiet felt holy. At 6:52 in the evening, the doorbell rang anyway. When I checked the peephole, Dad stood there, still in his work shirt, jaw tight. Open the door, Emma. No. Don't play games. I'm not. He muttered something under his breath about disrespect, but I didn't move. Finally, the footsteps faded down the hall. I locked the deadbolt twice, leaned against the door, and let out a shaky breath. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to win. The next day, Mom tried a softer weapon, a voicemail, her tone sugar-coated and trembling. Sweetheart, Jenna's trying her best. She needs a little support, just this once. Think about what family means. I deleted it halfway through. By evening, I got a FaceTime call. The family conference. I almost didn't answer, but part of me wanted to see their faces, wanted to finally stop pretending. When the screen lit up, all 3 were there. Mom in the kitchen, Dad at the head of the table, Jenna beside her with swollen eyes and perfect lighting. Caleb hovered in the background, pretending to fix something on his phone. Emma, Mom started softly, can we please talk like adults? I thought that's what I've been doing, I said. Jenna jumped in. You embarrassed us. You made me look like a beggar. I didn't make you anything, I replied. You sent a demand and I declined. Her lips trembled. You don't believe in me. You never have. That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it used to work. Jenna, I said carefully, belief isn't a bank loan. Caleb chuckled, low and condescending. She's so uptight. No wonder you're single half the year. My voice didn't rise. Caleb, do you even hear yourself? He smirked. Just a joke. Mom cut in sharply. Enough. Emma, your sister's business could change her life. She just needs someone responsible on paper. Dad leaned forward, hands clasped. It's not even risky. It's a small loan. $150,000 tops. You'll co-sign. That's all. That's all, I repeated, letting the words sink in. You're asking me to guarantee a $150,000 loan for someone who quit her job last week. Mom's voice hardened. Don't be dramatic. We raised you better than this. I felt something snap. Not anger, just clarity. You didn't raise me to say yes. You raised me to survive saying no. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Dad's face flushed. Watch your tone. I am, I said evenly. It's calm. Mom's eyes narrowed. So that's it. You're walking away from your family. I'm walking away from being your financial plan. Jenna started crying, mascara pulling at the corners of her eyes. You're punishing me for being different. I'm setting boundaries, I said. There's a difference. Mom slammed her hand on the table. You'll regret this, Emma. I nodded once. Maybe, but I'll regret it on my own dime. I ended the call. Seconds later, the group chat exploded. Paragraphs from Mom, threats from Dad, emojis from Aunt Rose, one message from Jenna. You destroyed this family. I didn't reply. I turned off notifications, opened my exit plan, and started checking boxes. Removed from phone plan, unlinked insurance, canceled utilities, closed shared credit line. Each completed task felt cleaner than the last. By midnight, 43 missed calls blinked on the screen. None from Mike. He knew. When the phone rang again, I finally picked up. Hey, he said quietly. You sound lighter. I think I'm just done, I said. Then do something about it, he replied. Not for revenge, for peace. That line hit deeper than I expected. At 10:04 in the morning, I drafted one last message to my mother. I'm leaving for Dublin Monday. Please stop contacting me unless it's an emergency. I hovered over send, hand trembling. Then I pressed it. The next morning, the retaliation came fast. Posts on Facebook about ungrateful children. Aunt Rose's chain messages about forgiveness. Jenna's cryptic story. Sometimes the ones you love hold you back. They wanted me to feel shame. Instead, I felt still. When Monday came, I zipped up my suitcase. The air in my apartment was cold, clean. Every bill in my name, every key in my hand. As I rolled my suitcase to the door, my phone buzzed one last time. A text from Mom. We won't forget this. I typed back slowly. Neither will I. Then I powered it off. At the airport, as the plane engines roared, I thought about every Thanksgiving table, every guilt trip, every silent yes that had built their comfort. And I thought about that one small no that tore it all down. When the wheels left the ground, my heart did too. Part 4, Freedom, 742 words. Dublin was colder than I imagined. Gray skies, damp air, and a kind of silence I wasn't used to. But maybe that's why it felt like healing. My company apartment was small, one bedroom, white walls, a view of the canal. Everything inside belonged to me. Every bill, every key, every decision. No shared accounts, no borrowed peace. For the first week, I moved like someone learning to breathe again. I woke up early, walked to work through cobblestone streets, and drank coffee that actually tasted like mine. At night, I cooked for one and listened to the kettle whistle. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for the next crisis call that never came. The quiet felt strange at first, but then it didn't. Mike arrived that Friday, suitcase in hand, and a grin that made the place feel less foreign. You really did it, he said. You left. I laughed softly. Yeah, and somehow I'm still standing. He looked around to the apartment. It's peaceful here. Peaceful feels weird, I admitted. But I'll get used to it. We ate dinner on the couch, candles flickering against the rain-streaked window. My phone sat face down on the table, silent. When I finally picked it up, there were no new messages. For the first time in years, the absence of noise felt like a blessing. Days turned into weeks. I got promoted early, led my first project, made friends who didn't need rescuing. One afternoon, I scrolled through old notes. The payments, bills, utilities list I'd once treated like scripture. At the bottom, I added one final line. Debt cleared, emotionally and otherwise. A month later, Mom left a voicemail. Her tone was softer this time. We're fine, sweetheart. Jenna found part-time work. Your dad says hi. I didn't call back, but I smiled anyway. Distance was doing what love never could. It made things kinder. I thought about that a lot in those early months. How space gave people room to grow. How absence forced accountability. Jenna getting a job wasn't my doing. It was hers. And that was how it should have been all along. Sometimes I'd stand by the window, watching the canal lights ripple. The old Emma would have felt guilty for feeling okay. The new one just whispered, I earned this. There was no lightning bolt moment of healing, no grand epiphany. Just small, quiet days where I realized I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, wasn't bracing for the next demand, wasn't calculating how much love would cost this time. I started doing things I'd never had time for before. Joined a book club, took a pottery class that met on Thursday nights, went to Sunday brunch without checking my bank account first. Little freedoms that added up to a life I actually wanted to live. Mike visited again in December. We walked along the river, bundled in coats, our breath fogging in the cold air. "You seem different," he said. "Good different." "I feel lighter," I told him. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. He squeezed my hand. "You didn't just stand up straight. You walked away. That takes guts." On Christmas morning, I woke up alone in my apartment. No frantic texts about who was bringing what, no passive-aggressive comments about my absence. Just silence and coffee, and a book I'd been wanting to read. It was the most peaceful Christmas I'd ever had. Sunday morning, weeks later, sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, catching the steam from my coffee. No buzzing phone, no new demands. Just quiet. I thought about that first text, the one that ended 15 years of family peace. "You'll take care of us." Maybe once I would have, but not anymore. I used to mistake being needed for being loved. Now I know real love doesn't drain you. It steadies you. Real love doesn't demand you set yourself on fire to keep others warm. It asks, "Are you okay? What do you need?" I looked out over the Dublin skyline, smiling to myself. Peace didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence. With mornings like this, with the simple radical act of choosing yourself. CTA, 50 words. If you've ever chosen peace over guilt, share your story below. Hit subscribe for more stories about finding yourself when the world expects you to lose yourself for others. Drop a comment. You're not alone. Let's keep this conversation going.
Your sister's graduation is more important than your surgery. That's what my mother said to me. Out loud, like it made perfect sense. My name is Olivia, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because that day, I realized something brutal. I wasn't a daughter. I was an afterthought. A burden. A shadow they never expected to shine. I was 17 when the pain in my abdomen became too sharp to ignore. At first, they said it was stress. Then gas. Then probably nothing. I Googled symptoms at night with shaky hands and a pit in my stomach. Turns out it was something. A ruptured ovarian cyst. I needed outpatient surgery. Not life-threatening, but urgent enough to be scheduled. The doctors explained it clearly. Rest was critical. Delaying it might risk further damage. My pre-op appointment was set. I was scared but relieved. And then Jessica's graduation landed on the same day. Jessica, my older sister. The family crown jewel. Honor roll. Cheer captain. Future veterinarian/influencer, depending on the week. Mom didn't ask how I felt. She didn't even pretend to weigh both events. "We'll have to cancel your appointment," she said while picking out Jessica's dress. "We can't be in two places at once, and your sister only graduates high school once. We've invited everyone. It would be selfish to make this about you right now." I didn't say anything. Because what do you say to that? What do you say when your mother shrugs off your medical needs like they're an inconvenience to her Instagram plans? I stayed home that day. In pain. Alone. While the rest of them smiled in family photos with gold balloons and "So proud of you, Jessica" signs. The pain was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to what settled into my chest. I looked at those pictures and realized something permanent. I was not important. Not to them. Not when it counted. I went to the hospital 3 days later by myself. Told them I missed my pre-op because of a family emergency. They rescheduled. I took the bus. Sat through the pain in a cold waiting room. Held my own hand when they inserted the 4. Signed the consent form alone. The nurse asked me, "Is someone coming to pick you up?" I said, "No. It's just me." She frowned. "You can't leave alone after anesthesia." So I waited. 6 extra hours. Until the meds wore off enough to walk straight. Then I took a cab back home. No one asked how it went. They were too busy posting Jessica's graduation video again, this time with filters and Taylor Swift lyrics. I healed slowly, physically, emotionally. Alone. That day became the blueprint for the years that followed. My pain didn't matter. My milestones didn't matter. If it didn't involve Jessica, it was an afterthought. And I learned to stop asking for space. But I didn't stop dreaming. And I never forgot. Because years later, when Jessica proudly announced her new hospital job, she had no idea that the chief of surgery she'd be answering to was the girl they left behind. Growing up, I used to wonder what it felt like to be someone worth celebrating. Not just tolerated. Not just allowed in the room. Celebrated. In our house, that person was Jessica. Always Jessica. She was the sun, and we were all expected to orbit her. When I got a 98 on my math exam, Mom said, "Why not 100?" When Jessica got an 85, there was a party because math isn't her strength, but she tried. I learned quickly. Trying wasn't enough for me. Excellence wasn't enough either. Because no one notices the wallpaper when they're obsessed with the chandelier. Jessica got a new dress every semester. Her own room, full of fairy lights, posters, designer perfumes. I got her old books and a twin mattress on the floor. She got violin lessons, ballet classes, debate tournaments. I got permission to walk home if I was done being dramatic. When I got strep throat at 10, I stayed in my room for 2 days. Mom left soup outside the door, like I was contagious to her love. But when Jessica twisted her ankle during cheer practice, the entire family canceled weekend plans. She cried once about a boy breaking up with her. My mother held her in bed all night like she'd lost a limb. When I cried after not being invited to a single birthday party in 6th grade, my mother said, "Well, maybe if you smiled more, people would like you." I stopped crying after that. Eventually, I stopped speaking much at all. I became quiet, invisible, a ghost in the house built for her. And while everyone looked at Jessica and saw a star, I looked at textbooks, science books, anatomy guides, anything that made sense, because nothing else around me did. When I was 13, I spent a month building a heart valve model out of clay and wires. I even wrote a paper explaining how it worked. My biology teacher pulled me aside after class. "This is exceptional," she said. "You ever thought about medicine?" I had. Every night. In secret. But I didn't say that. I just shrugged. Doesn't matter. My mom wants Jessica to be the doctor. She frowned. "With your mind? Your focus? You'd make a brilliant surgeon." That word lit something in me. Surgeon. Precise. Sharp. Necessary. Not decorative. Not replaceable. Not invisible. That night, while everyone was watching Jessica's latest talent show routine, I opened the laptop in our shared study room and searched. How to become a surgeon with no money, no support, and no one who believes in you. The answers weren't encouraging, but they were clear, and I followed them like a lifeline. Scholarships, community college, hospital volunteer work, a stack of free online prep guides printed on library paper. I didn't tell anyone, especially not Jessica, because I knew the minute she found out I wanted to be something real, she'd either take it or ruin it. I stopped asking to be seen, and instead, I learned how to survive in the dark. Until one day, I decided I wouldn't live in the shadows anymore. I'd become the light they never expected. Hunger makes you creative. Not just the hunger for food, though I knew that one well during my community college days, but the hunger to become, to grow, to prove, if only to yourself, that you're not the nothing they made you feel like. That hunger sat with me. Every day I studied under flickering library lights after working 5-hour shifts bussing tables. It burned in my chest when I opened emails that started with "We're pleased to inform you," and had no one to tell. Because in my family, success only counted if Jessica achieved it. The day I got into pre-med at a top university, I sat on a bench outside the admissions office and cried quietly. Not out of joy, out of exhaustion. No one knew what it took to get there. No one asked. No one cared. Mom texted me that day asking if I could Venmo your sister $40. She forgot her wallet again. I sent it, and never mentioned where I was. By then, I'd stopped trying to earn their recognition. They gave Jessica praise for showing up. I'd have to save lives to earn a nod. So I stopped chasing approval and started chasing skill. I moved through school like a shadow with a scalpel. I said yes to every anatomy lab, every 4 a.m. ER rotation, every coffee-fueled overnight shift that made other students complain. Because I wasn't just learning how to heal others. I was learning how to survive myself. There were nights I came home to an empty dorm, legs shaking from standing 12 hours straight, and stared at the ceiling wondering if it was all worth it. No support. No birthday calls. No "we're proud of you" texts. Jessica? She got a surprise car for her 21st.
Me?
I got silence. But then I met Dr. Leem, trauma surgeon, impossible to impress, feared by most students. He saw me once in a skills lab, stitching faster than anyone in the group. He paused behind me, said, "You've got blade precision. You planning surgery?" I hesitated. "If I make it that far." He narrowed his eyes. "You'll make it. You're a scalpel in a world of dull blades. Keep cutting." That was the first time anyone in the medical field spoke to me like I belonged. So I kept cutting. I kept rising. The hunger never left, but I learned to feed it with discipline, not desperation. And as I progressed, something strange happened. I no longer needed them. Not their permission. Not their money. Not their approval. My name went up on research papers. I became a resident in the same hospital Jessica followed online for years, the one she called her dream job. The irony? She didn't know I was already there. Already rising. Already seen. The only difference now? She was walking in with a paper badge. And I was walking in with power. It started with a post. Jessica, draped in hospital blue scrubs she hadn't earned yet, smiling with her ID badge, standing outside a building that had already memorized my footsteps. So excited to announce I've officially joined my dream hospital. Can't wait to start this next chapter. Hashtag future hero, hashtag hospital babe. She tagged our mom. She tagged 20 friends. She didn't tag me. Not that I expected her to. But the timing stung. I had just wrapped a grueling overnight rotation that ended with a 6 a.m. trauma call, followed by an administrative board meeting where I was formally introduced as the incoming chief of surgery. Years of work. Training. Nights I cried over bloodstains on my sneakers. No post. And she was being congratulated for showing up. The comments rolled in. "You're going to save so many lives. So proud of you, Jess. Heart sisters both in medicine. What a powerhouse family." That last one made me laugh. They didn't even know. Because Jessica had never once mentioned me. She told people I worked in admin stuff. That I did something with charts. Let her talk. I didn't care anymore. Then the phone rang.
Mom.
I let it go to voicemail. I listened later, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear her voice without hearing her voice. "Hi, Olivia. Just wanted to let you know your sister got hired at the hospital. Isn't that amazing? She's finally catching up to you. Maybe you two will bump into each other. Anyway, it's nice to see her chasing your dream." I replayed that line. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything. Your dream. They never asked what my dreams were. They just watched me build them, then handed them to Jessica like party favors. But something had shifted. I wasn't threatened. I wasn't bitter. I was ready. Because in 2 weeks, Jessica would walk into orientation at my hospital, grinning, glowing, proud to be part of the team. And she'd have no idea who she'd be reporting to. I prepped my welcome speech carefully. Professional. Neutral. Stern but inspiring. I made no changes to the list of new hires. I didn't highlight her name. I didn't flag her. Because I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of thinking this was about revenge. This wasn't about revenge. This was about recognition. Not from her. Not from Mom. Not from the people who only applauded when I was quiet. It was about walking into the room, fully, finally, and knowing no one could deny who I'd become. My badge didn't say Jessica's sister. It said Dr. Olivia Hart, MD, Chief of Surgery. The girl they left behind? She wasn't coming to orientation. The woman they ignored? She was already running it. Orientation morning. I stood at the front of the hospital's grand lecture hall, white coat crisp, name badge gleaming. Dr. Olivia Hart, Chief of Surgery. The room buzzed with nervous energy, 20 new hires, eyes wide, voices low. Some held clipboards, others adjusted their scrubs like armor. Jessica walked in 5 minutes late, giggling with another girl. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy making an entrance, the same way she always did at home, as if the room existed to celebrate her arrival. She picked a seat in the third row and sat, crossing her legs like she owned the place. And then I stepped up to the podium. The room settled immediately. Phones disappeared. Chairs straightened. Jessica looked up. Her mouth didn't fall open, but her eyes did. That flicker of recognition. That sudden, brutal, paralyzing stillness. I could feel it, not just in her, in everyone. The subtle shift in energy when the one person you dismissed walks in as the authority. I kept my expression neutral, my voice calm. "Welcome to Hart Memorial Hospital," I began, letting the irony of my last name settle quietly over the room. "You've been selected not just for your credentials, but for your potential. Here, we don't reward ego. We reward excellence." Jessica's hands gripped the sides of her chair. I didn't look at her. I addressed them all equally. "The rotation program will be rigorous. You'll be pushed, emotionally, mentally, physically. Some of you will grow. Some of you will break. And that's okay. What matters is that you show up with respect. For your patients, your peers, and this profession." I paused for effect, scanning the room, stopping only for a heartbeat longer where she sat. This isn't just medicine. It's a battlefield of lives. And the minute you make it about yourself, you've already lost. A few students scribbled notes. Jessica didn't move. Her face had flushed a soft pink. Her smile, gone. Her shoulders, tight. I wrapped up the speech, handed the floor to the training coordinator, and walked off stage to light applause. Backstage, I stood by the supply cabinet and breathed deeply. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't angry. I was in control. She followed me. I heard her footsteps long before she spoke. "Olivia," she said softly, "why didn't you tell me?" I turned slowly. She looked smaller than I remembered. "I didn't think it mattered," I replied. "Your chief?" she asked, like the word was choking her. I nodded. "You knew I was coming here?" "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" I tilted my head. Would it have changed anything? She didn't answer. So I walked past her, calm and clean. Not a trace of revenge in my step. Only purpose. Because I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to lead. And no matter what Jessica expected when she walked into that hospital, she wasn't the main character anymore. Hospitals are honest places. You can't fake competence in a trauma bay. You can't charm your way through a bleeder. And you can't cry your way out of a botched procedure checklist, not when lives are on the line. Jessica learned that quickly. The week after orientation, she started her rounds. Late to shift. Slow on charting. Always one step behind. She looked like a little girl playing dress-up in scrubs. But unlike home, this place didn't coddle her. Her peers advanced without her. Nurses raised eyebrows. Attendings stopped giving her chances. And me? I never lifted a finger. I didn't protect her. I didn't punish her. I let the system, the one I survived to master, do what it does best. Reveal. On Thursday, she missed a sterile protocol during pre-op prep. The OR nurse flagged it. I reviewed the report personally. No bias. Just facts. I signed the remediation notice and moved on. That afternoon, I got the text. From Mom. "Why are you being so cold to your sister? She needs support, not judgment." I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed just one sentence. "The same way you were when I needed you." She didn't reply. Neither did I. 2 days later, Jessica cornered me outside the break room, eyes glossy, voice trembling. "This is impossible," she said. "Everyone treats me like I don't belong here." I sipped my coffee. "Do you?" Her face dropped. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, "this place doesn't care about last names, or family trees, or high school crowns. It only cares if you show up, ready or not." She blinked fast, like she was trying not to cry. Then she asked the question she'd clearly been holding for days. "Why didn't you tell me you were chief?" I met her eyes. And for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance or entitlement. I saw confusion. Maybe even regret. But regret isn't redemption. And it's not responsibility. So I said the truth. You didn't ask. She didn't respond. Just stood there like she'd swallowed a scalpel. I left her there, same as I found her, pretending she was the star. But this wasn't a talent show. This was my world. And she'd finally entered it, without a script. Later that night, a nurse in the ER said to me, "Your sister's struggling. You gonna step in?" I shook my head. "She'll either rise," I said, "or she won't." But no one handed me a ladder. Because collapse isn't cruelty. It's gravity. And for once, I wasn't breaking the fall. Winning wasn't the moment I stood in front of Jessica at orientation. It wasn't seeing her stumble on rounds or watching her shrink under pressure. It was the moment I looked in the mirror and no longer saw someone waiting to be chosen. I was done waiting. I had become someone I respected, someone I trusted, not because I'd risen to chief, not because I'd survived my family, but because I had stopped letting them define who I was. That kind of clarity doesn't come with a job title. It comes with boundaries. I started building the kind of environment I once prayed for, not for myself, but for the next girl who walked in quiet and underestimated. I created a mentorship program for female residents, especially the ones who didn't come from private schools or picture-perfect families. Girls like me. One of them, Naomi, reminded me of myself so much it hurt. Always first to arrive. Always last to speak. One day, I caught her apologizing during rounds for knowing the right answer. I pulled her aside and said, "Don't you ever say sorry for being prepared." She nodded, tearful. "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." I leaned in. "Then carve your space until it fits you." That's the thing about ghosts. We learn how to haunt without being seen. But we also learn how to rebuild. And I was rebuilding. Every day. With every chart I signed. Every surgery I led. Every resident I trained. Even Jessica, who had been moved to general rotation after too many flagged incidents, was slowly beginning to understand the weight of the job and the burden of being unprepared. She didn't speak to me much anymore. She didn't look me in the eye. But she didn't fake smiles either. And that silence? I respected it more than any apology she could force out. Because not everyone deserves redemption in your story. Some people are just chapters. Unfinished. Unfolded. And best left where they belong, behind you. One afternoon, as I finished a successful liver transplant, a young nurse pulled me aside. "I know you probably hear this a lot," she said, "but thank you. You don't treat us like we're invisible." That word, invisible, hit something deep, because I had lived there for years. "You're not invisible," I told her. "You just haven't been seen by the right eyes yet." She smiled, but I didn't, because I wasn't being poetic. I was telling her the truth. It took me almost my entire life to find the right eyes. So I became them for someone else. I never mentioned my family during staff events. Never posted about my achievements. Never sought the praise I once begged for. Because now, I didn't need it. Recognition is loud when it comes from within. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a surgeon, a mentor, a leader. Not in their story. In mine. The invitation wasn't sent to my family. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. The hospital was hosting a ceremony to honor leadership in medicine, an award given once a year by the board to a department head who had not only led with excellence, but transformed the team around them. They chose me, Dr. Olivia Hart, Chief of Surgery, first woman under 35 to receive the award. First from my background. First whose name had once meant nothing to the people clapping now. The stage lights were hot but soft. The chairs were full. I could see some of my residents beaming, nurses in the back giving me thumbs up. And then, like a ghost from a former life, I saw her. My mother, seated in the second row, dressed like this was a wedding, smiling tightly, like she had been invited all along. She hadn't. Neither had Jessica, who sat next to her, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't flinch, not even when our eyes met. Not even when she gave me that familiar look that used to mean, "Come here, be small, make it about us." Because I wasn't hers anymore. I stepped onto the stage, took the glass plaque in my hand, thanked the board, Thanked the staff. Thanked my team. I spoke about hard work, about resilience, about systems that reward noise instead of impact. And then I paused. People often ask me what pushed me to succeed. The answer's simple: silence. The room leaned in. For a long time, I lived in silence. At home, at school, even during my own surgery. I wasn't seen. I wasn't heard. But silence became my greatest motivator. I looked out into the room, past the board members, past the camera crew, right through my mother. Because when no one speaks for you, you learn to speak for yourself. Applause thundered through the room. Jessica didn't look up. My mother's smile had vanished. I stepped down from the stage slowly, plaque in hand, head high. Outside, as the crowd broke into photos and handshakes, a reporter caught up to me. "Dr. Hart," she said breathlessly, "you've become one of the youngest leaders in hospital history. What drove you?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. "Pain," I said softly. "And purpose." They underestimated the wrong girl. She laughed. "And what would you say to anyone who's ever been dismissed?" I didn't hesitate. Turn the silence into strategy. Let the room go quiet, and then walk in like you own it. She nodded, scribbling notes. I turned back toward the hospital, toward my life, toward the world I built. Behind me, my mother and Jessica stood by the exit, watching. They didn't call out. They didn't follow. And I didn't turn around, because they already heard everything they needed to. They said her graduation was more important than my surgery. So I made sure my name would be the one carved on the wall. When I walked into that room as chief of surgery, the silence wasn't revenge. It was recognition. Because I didn't just survive. I became the reason the room went silent. "He's your brother. It's your duty." That was the sentence my mother screamed loud enough to rattle the windows. My name is Olivia. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because the moment they tried to make his failure my burden, they didn't realize I'd already locked every dollar in a vault they couldn't break. It was supposed to be a family meeting. That's what the group text said. But we all knew what it really was: an ambush. The moment I walked into my parents' living room and saw the thick envelope on the coffee table, I knew. They weren't there to talk. They were there to take. My father was sitting stiffly in his recliner, arms crossed. My mother was pacing like a lawyer about to deliver closing arguments. And my brother, Jason? Jason was slouched on the couch with his legs wide and arms folded, like a teenager sent to detention. Except he was 33, jobless, and apparently $47,000 in debt. Credit cards, gambling, some crypto scam. The details were blurry. The excuses, endless. What wasn't blurry was the demand. "You're doing well," Dad said, his voice flat, like he was reading a grocery list. "You have your own company. You can handle this." I tilted my head. "Handle what exactly?" "The debt," Mom snapped. "The collectors are circling. They're threatening legal action. He could lose everything. You're his sister." I blinked. And Mom's eyes widened like I'd cursed in church. "And, Olivia, we raised you better than this. You don't turn your back on family. Especially not your brother. You wouldn't even have your business if we hadn't supported you through college." "Supported?" I said, trying not to laugh. "I worked 3 jobs through college. Jason borrowed money from me while I was in finals week." "That was years ago," she said quickly, dismissively, like truth expired after a few birthdays. Jason hadn't said a word. Not one. Just stared at the wall like this wasn't even about him. They kept going. "This is what families do. You're the oldest. You lead by example. If we don't fix this, it ruins our name." Every guilt tactic, every manipulation, like a greatest hits album of toxic parenting. But I let them rant. Because what they didn't know, what they would never know, is that 3 months ago I met with my financial advisor. I moved every asset, every savings account, every property deed into an irrevocable trust. Not in my name. Not accessible to anyone. And guess who's not on the list of beneficiaries? Anyone with my blood. I watched them yell. Watched their faces twist in self-righteous fury. My mother even pointed at me like I was the one who had failed them. "She has no heart," she said to my father. "Her brother could go to jail, and she's sitting there like she's watching a movie."
No, Mom.
I wasn't watching a movie. I was watching the final scene of a performance I'd been cast in my whole life. And, tonight, I decided to walk off set. They thought I'd cave, that I'd pull out my checkbook like always. But all I did was lean back and smile, because the vault was sealed. And this time the key belonged to me. Jason has always failed upward. If you asked my parents, they'd say he was just finding his path. But from where I stood, it looked more like everyone else paving the road beneath his feet while he coasted barefoot through life. When we were kids, I learned early. If Jason cried, someone got blamed, and that someone was usually me. He broke Dad's antique watch when we were 8. I got grounded because I should have been watching him. He stole $40 from Mom's wallet in middle school. I got the lecture about trust and disappointment, while Jason played video games in the next room. By the time we were teenagers, the roles were locked in. I worked at the library after school. Jason threw parties in our basement while my parents were out of town. When I came home one night to find the living room trashed and 3 strangers asleep on our floor, I thought, surely this time, they'll do something.
They did.
They made me clean it up so the neighbors wouldn't talk. I remember standing in that room, holding an empty bottle and wondering if anyone in this family saw me as anything other than a built-in cleanup crew. It didn't stop there. He failed out of his first year of college. Mom cried for days. Dad yelled at me for not encouraging him enough. I got into business school on scholarship. Jason started selling sneakers online and called himself an entrepreneur. When it failed, I paid his phone bill so he wouldn't lose his apartment. I remember the exact amount, $378.42. I remember it because I had to choose between that and my groceries that week. When I told my mom, her reply was, "You're stronger. He's still figuring things out." That's when it hit me. They didn't just excuse his failure, they expected me to fund it. When I finally started my business, a real one, built from scratch with blood and bone and no handouts, guess who my parents introduced at a family wedding as the visionary of the family? Jason. Because he had ideas. Ideas that never made money. Never lasted more than 6 months. Ideas that landed him in $47,000 of debt and now had me sitting in their living room being told I had to do what's right. Right? What was right about spending my life cleaning up his disasters while they cheered him on for surviving the fires he set? What was right about rewarding someone who had never lifted a finger while the one who kept the roof from collapsing got handed a mop? There was no right. There was just a system, one built around Jason being the golden child, no matter how tarnished he became. And I was the scaffolding, the unthanked support beam, the one expected to stand still while the weight of everyone else's failure pressed down harder each year. But something had cracked, and this time I wouldn't be the one paying to fix it. I used to think love looked like sacrifice, like staying quiet when you're disrespected, like giving what you don't have because someone else claims to need it more, like shrinking yourself to make room for people who were never going to move over anyway. But that was before I opened a spreadsheet at 2 a.m. and realized something terrifying. In 10 years, I had given over $38,000 to my family, and not $1 had ever been paid back.
Rent.
Utilities. Emergencies. Credit card bailouts. Car repairs.
Fines.
Groceries. The list went on like a trail of breadcrumbs, except there was no home at the end of it. Just a bottomless pit called, "But you're doing well, right?" That night, I stare at that spreadsheet with my heart pounding. It wasn't just the number. It was the silence around it. No thank yous. No repayment plans. No birthday cards. No effort. They didn't love me. They loved what I could give. The realization made me physically sick. It wasn't just Jason. It was my parents, too. The way they'd look the other way when he failed and clap when I paid. The way my mother once told me, "You should be grateful you're in a position to help." As if my hard-earned security was a community asset. As if my boundaries were a betrayal. But I was done treating my success like a family donation box. So I called a financial advisor. A good one. His name was Marcus. Older, calm, Didn't flinch when I told him what I wanted. I want to build a structure, I said, that no one but me can access. He nodded. Irrevocable trust? Exactly. Over the next few weeks, we moved everything. My savings, my business revenue accounts, my properties, my emergency fund, all transferred into a protected legal trust structured under my business name, with airtight clauses and beneficiary locks. No cosigners, no relatives, no loopholes. And then I went further. I changed the passwords to my personal accounts. I removed my parents as my emergency contacts. I updated my power of attorney. I rewrote my will. It wasn't bitterness. It was liberation. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was protecting myself. I kept it quiet.
Clean.
Professional. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. Because people like Jason don't need explanations. They just need you to stay available. So I stopped being available. I built something stronger than walls. I built limits. That's what no one tells you. The real legacy isn't money. It's boundaries. It's teaching yourself to say no and meaning it. So when that family meeting happened, the yelling, the guilt, the pleas to rescue their golden boy again, I sat there knowing every account was locked, every asset sealed, every escape route closed. They thought I was sitting on a pile of gold waiting to be guilt into giving. But all they saw was the outer vault. The real wealth was already untouchable, and they would never see it again. The living room felt like a courtroom, and I was the one on trial. My parents sat across from me like a prosecution team, both armed with folders, statements, and rehearsed lines. Jason sat to the side, head bowed, looking bored, or maybe just detached. He hadn't said a word since I walked in. My mother took the lead. She always did. If you don't help him, she said, they're going to start garnishing wages. They'll come after his car, his credit, his dignity. I raised an eyebrow. Whose fault is that? My father jumped in, his voice heavier than usual. He made mistakes, yes. But he's your brother. He needs support, not judgment. I didn't answer. My silence made them angrier. And when people lose control, they get louder.
You have the money, Mom snapped.
We've seen your business.
You just posted about a new contract.
You paid for that trip to Italy last year, didn't you? I looked her dead in the eye. That trip was for a business deal I landed after working 80-hour weeks. You want a souvenir? Dad slammed the folder on the coffee table. It slid across the polished wood like a final verdict. Enough games, Olivia. This is your family. You're the only one who can help. I opened the folder slowly.
It was a bank statement.
Jason's. Overdrawn by thousands. Red numbers everywhere. Gambling charges. Transfers to crypto apps. A loan with 36% interest. And the total owed, $47,133.89. They expected me to pay it. To cover the sins, clean the stain, reset the board so Jason could mess it up again in 6 months. I looked at Jason. Still quiet. Still refusing to meet my eyes. I finally spoke. Jason, do you have anything to say? He shrugged. They told me you'd fix it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. He was always the child. Even now, a grown man waiting for someone else to fix his mess. I stood. For the first time in that room, I stood while they sat. No, I said. My mom's jaw dropped. No. No, I repeated. I'm not paying. I'm not saving. I'm not enabling. This ends now. You're just going to let him fall? My dad growled. I nodded.
Yes.
Because he's never learned what it feels like to stand. Mom reached for my arm. You don't mean this. We're your family. I stepped back. Family doesn't mean unlimited access to someone's life, time, and money. Family should mean respect. And you lost mine the moment you made my success a punishment. They kept talking, accusing, guilt-tripping. But I was already at the door. I turned one last time. The Olivia you could guilt into saving him doesn't exist anymore. Then I walked out. No drama. No door slam. Just a soft click behind me, and the sound of a system collapsing under its own weight. At first, the silence was loud. No calls. No texts. No, you'll regret this voicemails.
Just nothing.
I thought maybe they were regrouping, planning their next guilt campaign. But what I didn't realize was that my silence had done something unexpected. It forced them to sit with their own noise. 3 days after the meeting, I got the first call blocked number. I didn't answer. Then came the emails. First from Mom, then Dad, then even Jason. Subject lines like, "Please reconsider. We can fix this. You're tearing the family apart." I deleted them all without opening a single one. They tried one last power move, showing up at my office. I didn't even buzz them in. I watched them from the security camera and went right back to reviewing my quarterly reports. That's when the messages turned nasty. Mom left a voicemail. "Don't forget who raised you. Who gave you everything." Everything? You mean the house where I raised myself while you praised your son for waking up before noon? You mean the school years where I packed my own lunches while Jason got a new video game every report card? But I didn't respond. I didn't post online. I didn't vent to friends. I just watched. And as I watched, the house began to fall. Jason made a dramatic post online, a photo of an eviction notice taped to his door, with the caption, "Family only loves you when you're useful." It got a few likes, a handful of comments from his enablers, but the tide was shifting. One person replied, "You're 33. Maybe stop depending on your sister." Another, "Didn't she pay for your last car?" Then silence again. 2 weeks later, I heard from a cousin, one of the few I still talk to. "Hey," she said gently. "Just thought you should know your parents are trying to sell the house." "What?" I asked, though I already knew why. Apparently, the bank's pressuring them. They co-signed something for Jason a while back, and he defaulted. The house, the one they guarded like a trophy, the one I wasn't allowed to bring friends to because appearances matter, was slipping away. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. But I did feel a shift. Not because they were losing, but because for once, I wasn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the emergency contact. I wasn't the bailout fund. I wasn't the sponge they squeezed when things got tight. They were living inside a machine they built, and I had removed the engine.
And Jason?
The golden boy. Now just a man alone in a mess of his own making. No spotlight, no sympathy, no sister to sweep the floor behind him. I thought they'd stop. I thought once the house was on the market and the debt collectors came knocking, they'd finally get it, that I wasn't coming to save them this time. I underestimated how deep entitlement can rot. One morning, I opened my inbox to a message from a journalist I'd spoken to during a business conference. Casual contact. Nothing serious. Subject line. Heads up, someone's trying to dig. Inside was a screenshot, Jason's name, linked to a burner email, asking for information about my company. He was trying to sell a story. The message read, "She's not who she pretends to be. Ask around. She's not as clean as she looks. I have receipts." Receipts? I hadn't spoken to Jason in weeks. The only receipts he had were the Venmo logs of the money I sent him to keep the lights on. I sat there staring at the screen, my tea cooling in my hand. There it was, the last desperate attempt to flip the narrative. If guilt didn't work, if silence didn't work, if public shame didn't work, maybe a smear campaign would. And that's when I knew what I had to do. Not retaliate. Just reveal. I spent that night organizing everything. Not for the media, not for revenge, but for clarity. I gathered the bank transfers, screenshots of his begging texts, the late-night calls, the thank yous, the "you're my only hope" messages. Even the one where he said, "I wish Mom and Dad were more like you." I crafted a public statement. It was short, measured, not angry, just honest. I've spent over a decade helping my family behind the scenes. I never spoke on it publicly because I believed dignity meant handling things privately. But when that privacy is weaponized against you, silence becomes permission. I have nothing to hide. I'm proud of the work I've done, professionally and personally. And I will never apologize for protecting my peace or my boundaries. I attached no files, no screenshots. I didn't have to, because the truth has a sound, and when it's spoken calmly, it echoes louder than a scream. The post went viral. Messages poured in. Not pity, respect. People shared their own stories. Daughters expected to act like parents. Siblings turned into personal banks. Children burdened with debts that weren't theirs. The tide turned fast. Jason's attempt to sabotage me backfired spectacularly. Sponsors that had once followed him quietly unfollowed. A small podcast he'd been trying to launch? Cancelled. Comment shut down. Reputation cracked. My phone didn't ring. No apologies. Just silence. But this silence wasn't manipulative. It was surrender. The kind that happens when people finally see that their games no longer work. And me? I wasn't angry anymore. Because truth, when finally spoken, does something beautiful. It unlocks the part of you that no longer needs validation. And once that part wakes up, you never shrink again. Peace didn't arrive like a firework. It came like a slow tide, soft, steady, and full of clarity. I moved out of the city. Found a place on the edge of a hill where the sunrise kissed my windows before my alarm ever had the chance. My mornings became mine again. No buzzing phones. No emergencies disguised as family. Just coffee, emails, and the sound of my breath finally slowing down. I built back quietly. My business grew, not because of pity, but because I now had energy for the right things. Clients who respected my time. Teams who valued leadership over sacrifice. I didn't overshare. I didn't overextend. I just delivered excellence with boundaries in place. And then I started something new. A mentorship program for young women in finance. Not flashy, just real. I taught them what no one taught me. That financial success means nothing without emotional protection. That giving without limits isn't noble, it's destructive. And that love without respect is just manipulation dressed up in tradition. I watched them bloom faster than I ever had. Because they had tools. And they had me, someone who had walked through the fire and come out holding the blueprint. One afternoon, as I was reviewing grant applications for the mentorship program, my assistant walked in holding a plain, white envelope. No return address, she said. I recognized the handwriting before I even touched it.
Mom's.
It was short.
Neat.
Almost too neat, like she had rewritten it 5 times before sealing it. Olivia, we were wrong. We've been wrong for years. I didn't see it. I didn't want to. You've always carried too much. And we taught you that was love. But it wasn't. It was dependence. Maybe even fear. I don't know if you'll forgive us. But I do hope you're happy. Mom. I read it twice. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt a quiet release. She hadn't asked for money. She hadn't tried to explain away her behavior. For the first time in my life, she was just honest. And I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't need to answer everything anymore. Sometimes peace isn't a conversation. Sometimes it's knowing you could say something and choosing stillness instead. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer next to the contract for my new home, and got back to work. Because now I don't chase closure. I build futures. And my future? It doesn't carry anyone else's mistakes. Just the lessons and the strength that came from surviving them. The room buzzed with quiet elegance. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Tables were dressed in ivory linen and silver accents. A catered lunch waited behind the curtain. And in the center of it all stood a podium with my name on the welcome banner. Olivia Patterson, Wealth and Wellness Summit. I never thought my story would end on a stage. I never wanted a spotlight. But when you spend most of your life being erased, sometimes the best revenge is simply being seen on your terms. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about something bigger, legacy. Not the kind they tried to burden me with, not Jason's mess, or my parents' shame, or the guilt they gift-wrapped and handed to me every year like a birthday card. This was legacy as I defined it, building a space where boundaries were honored, where wealth wasn't handed out to fix mistakes, but created to build futures, where young women, especially those like me, could learn the truth early. You owe no one your ruin, not even your family. After the event ended, a young woman came up to me. She couldn't have been more than 24. She looked nervous, inspired, Maybe both. She said, "How did you learn to protect yourself like this?" I smiled, and I told her the truth. By surviving the people who believed they were entitled to me. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. She understood. There's a certain silence in people like us, those who've carried the weight of entire households before learning we had permission to put it down. We don't speak loud, but we build loud. My trust still exists. It's grown now. It holds not just my finances, but my future, my business, my mentorship program, my safety net. It's structured so tightly, not even a court order could pry it open. And no, I didn't list my parents or Jason as beneficiaries. Not out of hate, but out of survival. Because trust is more than paperwork. It's knowing who can sit at your table and who only comes hungry. Months passed. One day, I drove past my childhood home. It had a new coat of paint. A new family lived there. 2 little kids were running through the sprinkler in the front yard. I didn't feel bitter. I felt nothing. That house was no longer mine to grieve. And as for Jason, I don't know where he ended up. Last I heard, he was working part-time somewhere, couch surfing with a friend from high school. He still hasn't called. And I hope he never does. Because I am no longer his emergency contact. No longer his bailout plan. No longer a name on any list that ends in obligation. He had a sister once. One who gave, and gave, and gave, until she finally learned to lock the vault. They told me it was my duty to clean up his mess. But I made a different choice, to clean up the part of me that thought I owed them anything. They reached for the vault, but I had already changed the locks.